So I want to welcome everyone to the next episode of the Rapoport webinar series. This is sponsored by Rapoport, the Rapoports, and also by Barco. We want to thank them for also supporting our series of talks. And again, these are sort of non-clinical talks, things they don't teach you in medical school. And tonight we have a special guest, Ron Howrigan, who is president and CEO of Fulcrum Strategies, consulting firm that represents physician practices across the country in their dealings with managed care companies. For over 22 years, Fulcrum Strategies has worked with over 5,000 physicians in 30 states in all specialties. Ron has worked, and his company has worked with my group for over 15 years. And, that just sort of speaks to the longevity and the value we put in working with Ron and all the insights he's brought to our contracting. Prior to Fulcrum, he spent 18 years in managed care, both as a negotiator and as a network manager. He held senior management positions in Kaiser, Cigna, Blue Cross, and Blue Shield. And he earned his BA in business from Western Michigan University and has a master's in economics from North Carolina State. So I think without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Ron.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. Let me share my screen and I'll get the presentation started. All right, can everybody see my screen? Great. So as you heard in the introduction, I spent the first 18 years of my career working for the insurance companies. So a lot of the information I'm going to go through about managed care, it comes from that experience. Sometimes when people understand my background, I feel like I need to do that, opening, good afternoon, my name is Ron Howrigan. I'm a recovering managed care executive. Been clean and sober of managed care for 22 years now. So I'm going to go through a little bit about sort of how managed care works. Need to swap presenter to display. Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go a little bit about how managed care works. A lot of the stuff you said you don't get taught in medical school, and try to teach you what their approach to things are, and then how radiology plays into that. It's helpful to understand them because you're going to have to deal with them. It's called health insurance, not sick insurance. This is actually came from an insurance executive when I worked at Cigna. And what they were explaining to us inside the company is we don't like sick people. We make money on healthy people. And a lot of what managed care does, a lot of the things that drive you guys nuts are designed around this idea. You're in the business of helping people who have a problem or who are a disease or ill, et cetera. They're in the position of trying to avoid those people. And the reason that they're in that position is this slide. Every insurance executive or managed care executive understands this. And that's the fact that 5% of the population consumes 51% of all the cost. The bottom 50% of the population, the healthy 25-year-old male, only consumes 3% of the money. So if you think about the way managed care works, the way insurance companies work, if I can figure out a way to get rid of 5% of my population that are consuming 50% of all the healthcare costs, I lose 5% of my revenue, but I lose 50% of my expenses. So a lot of the things that they do really aren't as much around controlling utilization as they are making it hard for those people who actually need their service. One of the things that I'm an economist by training that's really bizarre about health insurance is it has opposite incentives. Apple wants you to buy a new phone and a new computer. Ford wants you to buy a new truck. Restaurants want you to come back again and again. They make money by helping their customers be happy and serving their customers. Insurance is the opposite. They don't want customers. They don't want these people to be happy. And so they put up a lot of things that drive you guys nuts, like prior authorization. They put them up as barriers to try to make that top 5% leave them and go to someone else. They call that adverse selection. Now, one of the questions that people go is there really that much money involved in this? Well, yeah, the money on the payer side is staggering, which is why they do a lot of this stuff. This is a graph of United Healthcare's stock price starting at the year 2000 and looking at what happened with their stock price until up to 2025. This doesn't even tell the full story because inside of this there are 3 stock splits. 2-for-1 splits over this time period. So put another way, you think about United Healthcare and how much money is in the insurance side of it. In 2000, the stock price for United Healthcare was $7.30 a share. On April 11th of 2024, it was $600 a share. What that means is, with these splits over the last 25 years, if you had invested $100,000 in United Healthcare stock 25 years ago, you would have purchased a little over 13,000 shares. Because of the splits, today you would own 109,000 shares. That $100,000 investment would be worth $30 million today. That's how much money is involved in the payer side, which is why they do an awful lot of what they do. That's not even the part that's going to make people throw up. Their stock has lost about half of its value in the last year. So a year ago today, that $100,000 investment would have been worth $57 million. So there's massive amount of money and huge incentives for them to continue the activities that they've done. What do you want your denial rate to be? This is actually a question that got asked to me by one of the radiology benefit managers, one of the companies that sort of get in the way between the ordering physician wanting an MRI and you guys performing it and reading it. And when he asked me this question, I was like, I didn't understand it. And so I said, what do you mean, what do I want it to be? So basically what was going on, I was working for Cigna, and we had a radiology benefit manager that was, prior authing all of the MRIs and CTs for us. We were not having a great financial year. And he said, oh, I can fix that. What do you want your denial rate to be? And I said, well, won't it be whatever the inappropriate ordering of MRIs are? I mean, if 10% of the MRIs are inappropriately ordered, I was naive back then it'll be, what do you mean what I want it to be? And he just laughed. He said, Deron, that's not how this works. And then he explained to me that what they had in their system was these algorithms. So let's say it was an MRI of the brain, and they might have 7 indicators. And their current algorithm says, if you have at least 3 of these 7 things, you get it. He goes, all I have to do is change my algorithm from 3 of 7 to 4 of 7, and I know how many new denials I'll pick up. I said, so wait a minute, you're telling me that on Friday, somebody could present with a certain set of clinical facts and it be approved clinically. And on Monday, because you changed the rules, that same patient would not be approved. He said, that's exactly what I'm telling you. So what do you want your denial rate to be? One of the things we've got to look at as we talk about what the future looks like, et cetera, and especially when we deal with radiology and imaging, is we got to look at what's happened over the last 25 years, because this is what's putting pressure, enormous pressure on, physician shortages, et cetera. In the year 2000, the Medicare conversion rate was $36.61. That's what you got paid per Medicare RVU. In 2025, you've actually lost 12% of the reimbursement. You've gone from $36 to $32, a 12% reduction in how much you get paid. And the payers base their reimbursement off of Medicare rates anyway. That same period of time, if I just look at Consumer Price Index, CPIU, general inflation, we've seen a cumulative 81% increase in general inflation, while physicians have lost 12% of the reimbursement from Medicare reductions. In the year 2000, the median price of a house was $120,000. It was $420,000 in 2024. So we've seen an 81% increase in inflation, 250% increase in the median price of a house, and a 12% reduction in how much you get paid from Medicare to read the exact same study. We all know that there's a huge physician shortage, and it's getting worse, and it's going to get worse, much worse. And so it's helpful to look at sort of what does that look like and how did we get here? First of all, over 50% of all practicing physicians right now are over the age of 55. In radiology, that number is 53% of all practicing radiology. And by practicing, I mean reading, not academic, et cetera, are over the age of 55. That means we're going to turn over at least 50% of all of the practicing physicians in this country in the next 10 years, if it's simply due to nothing other than retirement. Forget about burnout and any of the other factors. One of the telling statistics to me is a study that said that less than 50% of physicians would now recommend medicine as a career for their children. That to me is telling on the pressure that's happening right now in practicing physicians. less than half of them would recommend this profession. What used to be, when I was growing up, a noble profession that everybody strived for is now, for the people who are doing it, saying, don't do this. 61% of medical students and nursing students, and I wish they would have separated the two, but they didn't. They combined this data. Don't plan on using their training to provide direct patient care. So if we've already got a shortage, we know that we're going to turn over half of the physicians in the next 10 years, and we know there aren't nearly enough people in training to even fill those. And if 61% of them, or even half of them, choose not to use their training for direct patient care, we're facing some very serious shortages in the future. 10 years ago, over 60% of physicians were in independent practice. Today, less than half are independent practice, whether it's PE or hospitals, et cetera. And I'm not saying that physicians who work for a hospital, it's necessarily a bad thing. It's just a shift in what we are seeing in the marketplace right now. So we see what the pressures are. What does the future look like? Because this is really I think the gist of what do we do and where are we going and how do we address it? Well, we know there's going to be a physician shortage. It's going to be massively short. That's even worse in radiology as demand and everything goes up. We've got increasing demand, as I just said, in radiology, not only in the number of imaging studies that need to be done as technology improves, what additional things we can do with imaging, and you guys know this much better than I do. I heard the numbers a while ago, I don't remember them, but reading an MRI today is very different than the technology and what you got as far as the amount of information, et cetera, 10 years ago. So even the workload for an individual study is going way up. AI won't solve the supply demand problem. There's been a lot of talk about this. There's people who think that AI is going to replace radiologists. Absolutely not. There's nothing that I think or have seen that will do that. It may help a little bit as it helps with things like doing reports, et cetera. But I don't think there's any danger of AI, replacing radiologists or in essence solving the shortage problem. My opinion as an economist, especially looking at healthcare cost across the spectrum, is accurate imaging must be part of the cost solution. It is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to avoid much more expensive, much more invasive downstream cost. I always use the analogy of, breast imaging. Accurate screening, accurate breast imaging saves money because then you don't do unnecessary biopsies, you don't do unnecessary procedures, et cetera. It's the best way to figure out who needs to do what. And that is prevalent throughout all of imaging. And so to me, when we deal with this cost problem, imaging has to be a core part of that because it's a wonderful way to non-invasively diagnose and get things done the right way the first time. Payers are going to continue to target radiology. There's a cartoon that I love from the Far Side where it's two deer that are standing up in a forest and one of them has a bullseye right on his white chest. And the other deer looks at him and says, "Bummer of a birthmark, Hal." Well, you guys have that target on your chest, unfortunately. And the reason is, and payers know this, and it's why they target radiology, because you're one of the specialties that really doesn't have a personal relationship with the patient. When I was on the payer side, we knew you don't screw with OB, you don't screw with pediatrics because you don't mess with moms and babies. There's a connection there. There's a personal relationship between physician and patient. You guys don't have that, and it makes you an easy target because people don't know their radiologist. They don't love their radiologist like they do their pediatrician or obstetrician. The No Surprises Act can be used as an advantage in radiology. We're starting to see that. As much as there's parts of the NSA we have to be very careful about, its external price setting, et cetera, it can be used as an advantage going forward because now you've got this external entity that can tell you they have to pay you at least X amount. So far, the data shows that the providers are winning 85% of all the cases that go to IDR, and they're winning fairly large awards. In radiology, the average award when going to IDR is 5 times what the QPA or the original offer was. So even if that original offer is 100% of Medicare, that means the average award is 500% of Medicare. So it can be used as an advantage when dealing with the payers. It can help offset that fact that they target you because you don't have a relationship with the patient. There's also some very interesting opportunities for hospital partnerships to increase in this area. And the reason is the hospitals have to have imaging. They've got to have good imaging. It's a great way to help bolster you, the rest of your staff. And with the shortage that's coming up, a lot of hospitals are starting to face increasing stipends. So one of the things that I tell groups all the time is you should be talking to your hospital and saying, you should work with us. You should help us get appropriate reimbursement from the carrier because that will lower your stipend. In one respect, when I'm negotiating for my radiology clients, I'll say to the hospital, I'm not negotiating their money as much as I'm negotiating your money because every dollar they get from a United Healthcare or a Blue Cross is a dollar they don't have to come and look for you. So it creates a scenario where you're both on the same team and wanting the same event or environment. All right, so what can we do with all these pressures and all this scenario? There's a lot of things that I think we can do, both as individual groups, but definitely as association societies, and then in total from a macro perspective. First of all, there's a lot of work that I think can and should be done in the legislative front. And there's a ripe opportunity with the cost of to the government, et cetera, and some of the things that have happened to sort of explain these. But they've got to be reasonable, logical, explainable things. Perfect example is there should be a push, and we can do a push to define things like prior authorization, denial as the practice of medicine. If there was a simple change to the law that said that whenever a payer medical director refused the prior authorization for an MRI or denied a PET scan, and they signed off on it, that act was the act of practicing medicine. And once we define it as such, because it currently isn't, they're making a quote unquote benefit decision. They're not practicing medicine. Well, once we define that as the act of practicing medicine, several things automatically kick in. One is that they've got to have a license to practice. They've got to be practicing within their specialty. You can't have a pediatrician deny an MRI of the brain. And they would have to create a medical record, an actual chart, an EMR chart that explained their thought process. And finally, if they're wrong, and if they're deemed to be wrong on that, they can be sued for malpractice. Just like the radiologist who misses a read, just like the ordering physician who forgets to order something. That would be a simple change that would change the way medicine works and the way the payers work overnight. Because overnight, all of this prior auth and denial stuff would go away because it would be too expensive. I think we should talk about using a common set of clinical criteria. I don't understand why patient A with insurance A presenting with the exact same conditions and presentations as patient B with insurance B get different things. Why should one be approved and one not be approved? If it's clinically correct or efficacy, et cetera, it should be approved regardless of who the insurance is. That would be done by using a common set of clinical criteria. I think there should be external expedited appeals. When a payer is saying no or denying something, there should be some place you can go. There was a story, and I know the guys who were involved, and Mark Cuban was involved about it, and I don't know the exact clinical issue. There was a baby who needed something dramatically. The payer was saying no. And it was one of those things where, in 48 hours, it's too late. And the payer said, well, you can appeal. Problem is the appeal process takes a week to 10 days. They don't have that kind of time. And Mark Cuban and some other folks basically said, look, we'll pay for it. Fly the baby to the hospital. The baby got what they needed, good outcome. And then after that, the payer finally said, all right, we overturn the appeal. So if there was an expedited appeal process, that would fix that issue. Legislation that requires COLA adjustments on the Medicare conversion factor. The same way there are automatic cost of living adjustments for Social Security. If we had that legislation, it changes things dramatically. If that legislation were passed in the year 2000, and all you got was cost of living adjustments, the same adjustments that Social Security recipients get, which aren't enough, instead of getting paid $32 a unit, you'd be getting paid $66 a unit right now. If that were the case, we wouldn't have necessarily the same problem on shortage that we have because it would be much more financially advantageous to go into medicine. Litigation is another area. We're actually starting to see an awful lot of this, and this is going to change a lot of what the payers are doing. Antitrust. Up until recently, insurance companies were exempted from the Sherman Antitrust Act. They were written out of it. That law changed, and we now have the first Department of Justice and FTC investigation for antitrust violations, and they're investigating United Healthcare. One of the things, and I won't get too geeky, but economists look at market concentration with what's called the HH index. And it's an index from 0 to 10,000, with 10,000 being a perfect monopoly. The number of 2,500 is sort of the threshold where economists say if it's over 2,500 in the FTC, it's probably something we should break up. Almost most of the states in the country have a number well in excess of 2,500 when you look at market concentration for insurance companies. So without this sort of exemption, they will all have been broken up a long time ago. Alabama is the most concentrated state in the country. Its HH index is 8,500, which I've never seen an industry that looks like that. So there's antitrust litigation that could help do some of this stuff. RICO violations, which are racketeering violations. Right now, Cigna Healthcare is under a potential RICO lawsuit for defrauding the federal government and creating this shell corporation in Switzerland for hiding PBM money. If they ever get them on a RICO violation, not only is it treble damages, which hurt badly, but now you get into criminal charges. David Cordani, who's the CEO of Cigna, could actually have held in criminal charges for this if this goes through. So that's another piece. There's some investigations on payers violating their fiduciary responsibility for self-funded employer groups that really has them very nervous about how they're sort of pocketing money at the expense of the employer group. There's also been now several settlements for Medicare fraud where the payers are upcoding to get better Medicare money for their severity. My favorite one is Aetna just settled a $117 million lawsuit for adding morbid obesity diagnoses as almost every Medicare patient they had. These patients aren't morbidly obese. The charts don't show that. And Aetna sort of just added that diagnosis before they sent the data over to the federal government. And they had to pay 117 million. Kaiser just paid 500 million for the same thing. And there's Medicare fraud violations investigations going on for United Healthcare. So these are just some of the things that we can do both from a legislative and litigation perspective. The other thing is doing a better job with public relations and advocacy. The House of Medicine has done a wonderful job focusing on improving clinical care. There's no other country you'd rather be in if you've got an issue and have insurance than this country from a quality perspective. What it hasn't done a great job of, in my opinion, is sort of telling its story and really playing into public relations and advocacy and why we should protect physicians, the practice of medicine, et cetera. I thought we had an opportunity when everybody was feeling, very good about physicians after COVID happened, but that feeling has gone away, and we need to do a better job of really explaining what you all do, why you're important, and why we don't want to, destroy this profession and have the shortage that's coming down the pike. With that, I am more than happy to answer any questions. I know everybody's time is valuable, but I wanted to run through that, and I did it in about 30 minutes, and then see what questions any of you have. Or maybe I just depressed the hell out of everybody. I hope that's not the case.
So one of the three Richard Friedlands has a quick question, or maybe
Sure.
it's not a quick question, but how does Medicare Advantage alter the equation that we're sort of seeing in terms of payer mix, in terms of what the future is, in terms of managed care? How do you pay that forward into the future?
Well, so Medicare Advantage, up until recently, has been the most profitable per capita member for any payer. And that doesn't make sense. For most of physicians, it's one of their worst payers from a reimbursement perspective. But on the payer side, they got such a sweetheart deal when they negotiated that with the government, and they make a scat of money. So in general, per individual, Medicare Advantage has been twice the profit load as commercial insurance, which is why they all jumped into it. Now, I say up until recently, The problem they're having now, and which is why United Healthcare lost half the value of their company in the last year, is people have figured it out and the gig's up. They figured it out that they've been upcoding. They figured it out they've been adding diagnosis. They've now figured out that United Healthcare, one of the reasons why they own 10% of all the physicians in the country is so they can get them to add diagnosis codes to increase their Medicare reimbursement. So I really think the MA stuff, the gig is up. And too many people know about it now, and that's going to start to become less profitable. I will tell you that as soon as that profit goes away, they will walk away from that business in a heartbeat. They've got no love of seniors. They've got a love of money. So I wouldn't be surprised by what you start to see, and it won't happen next year, but in maybe 28 or 29, you start to see the number of MA or Medicare Advantage recipients start to dwindle, because they will throw those folks under the bus as soon as it's not profitable for them to do it. They did get a bump of 2.8% the other day from the federal government, which, they all loved, and that was a huge amount of lobbying effort. But eventually that's going to dry up.
So will that then pressurize the old-fashioned Medicare system as people sort of go back or try to go back? And what does that mean for our debt, our government? What does that mean for the payer mix that the rest of us are fixing? What's your take on that?
Well, so, healthcare as an expense from the government is one of the few areas where we're seeing the percentage of the total budget going up. Set aside interest on the debt, okay? Because I looked at, I went back to 1997 and then compared to 2025. If you look at a percentage of the federal budget, Social Security is actually a smaller percentage of the budget today than it was in 1997. Defense is a smaller percentage of the budget today than it was in 1997. Healthcare, larger percentage. So even though the federal budget's growing every year, the percentage we spend on healthcare is going up dramatically every year. That has to be fixed. There's truisms in this world. I like to tell people that, all my surgeon friends are fond of saying that all bleeding stops eventually. I got a friend who's an airline pilot, and he likes to tell me that all planes land eventually. It's whether or not you do it successfully. Well, this idea that healthcare is going to consume a bigger and bigger part of our economy and federal budget eventually has to fix itself. It's how is it going to do it? Medicare Advantage has now been fairly well proven that it didn't save us any money. It was touted as being a savement. So there's a lot of economists who say, you know what? Actually going back to straight Medicare might save the federal government money because we won't be overpaying these insurance profits.
This is Peter Millick speaking.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was like
You're welcome.
30 minutes of terrific information. But
you're welcome.
You noted that radiologists are different from other specialists and non-specialists because of patient contact or lack of patient contact. What are other specialties doing that radiologists may not be doing at this point? And are there other groups that are more successful at promoting their interests than we are, and why is that?
Yeah, well, so other groups have some advantages that you don't have. Typically, I'll give you a perfect example. One of my clients is a neurology group, okay? And, they're facing similar pressures to everybody else. Costs are going up, people want more money for their nurses, et cetera. But what they've got as an advantage is they can choose which patients they see. So this group said, look, Medicare pays me $100 to see this patient. Blue Cross pays me $150. Same patient, same appointment slot. Well, why don't I see less Medicare? And they can control that through their appointment scheduling. So in other words, they only open up so many new patient slots for Medicare. And they'll fill those slots in a physician shortage because I know I've got more patients than I can see. I'll fill them with non-Medicare. So this group changed their appointment scheduling system. They still see the same number of patients, but the financial return was much better because why would I sell an airline seat for $100 when somebody else will buy it for $150? You guys don't have that option. You sort of everything that goes across screen, you got to read. In addition, they can play the patient relationship. And a lot of specialties can do this when they got that relationship. Perfect example, that same neurology group. Payer comes to them and says, I'm going to cut your reimbursement. And I'm their negotiator. I say, well, that's really unfortunate because, see, then we're not going to be able to care for those MS patients and give them their Ocrevus infusion every 4 weeks to help them with this horrible disease. That's going to look really bad when these poor patients have to go in front of the news media and say, I can't get my infusion drug because a big bad insurance company decided to cut the. You can't have that happen if you're an insurance company. You're already hated. You guys don't have that same ability to do that. And so that's the sort of the difference there. I think the advantage that imaging has that needs to play better is, again, you are a critical part to the cost solution because it is the most cost-effective way to get to the right diagnosis for a lot of things so that we're not wasting time and money sort of tracking down and it's non-invasive and the patients like it a lot better than the other options. So but that's where I think the real difference is. The other players can play off on that patient relationship and you just don't have it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because in our battles on encroaching mid-level providers, we're really focused on quality, which is our strong point.
Yeah.
And several people on the line here have been doing that for years. But what
Yeah.
you're suggesting is there is another piece to that, and that's yeah.
There's another piece. I do think, though, the quality argument is a really good one. I oftentimes explain to people, from an expense perspective or payer perspective, one of the problems that we have is we haven't figured out how to pay for quality. So when you read an image, okay, when you read a study, there are three potential outcomes. One outcome is what we all want, which is, hey, I know exactly what's going on. This is it. It's not this, where you give a definitive answer to the ordering physician. Now the ordering physician knows what to do. That's one. Another outcome is, I don't know, could be this, could be that, sort of ambiguous read. And the third outcome is a wrong read. It's just wrong. The problem is all three of those options have the exact same CPT code and pay the exact same amount of money. And in some imaging, in a lot of imaging, there's actually a financial incentive to not be as good. If I'm running a breast center, then my financial incentive is to get another study. Go, well, it might be this. So now we'll take that screening mammogram and turn it into a breast MR or a needle guide. That's my financial incentive, is to sort of to have the need for more imaging. So the quality argument's definitely there, because if I can do it better, you're going to avoid that second image, or you're going to avoid the bad read or the ambiguous read that then requires the physician to go down some other path.
I think Mark has had his hand up.
Yeah, I'm listening to this, and I think that quality argument doesn't go anywhere. I mean, we've tried that. Nobody cares about quality anymore, it seems, with the insurance companies and the hospital systems. They're really just trying to drive up the money that they're getting. It's these nonprofit insurance companies and hospitals are making it hand over fist.
Yeah.
Those individuals are making it like you can't believe it. They're getting, not 10 million, 20, $30 million a year contracts. And these are nonprofits. And we see that in hospitals too. Furthermore, radiology is such a small part of the big picture. And if you look at it, it's the insurance companies, and hospitals that are driving all this cost. Look what's happening with Anthem and Elevis, the Excellus companies lately. 13 states they have already gone into, and they're saying that if you have physicians that refer to your hospital and they're out of the network that the insurance company has, they're going to not only, there's no surprise act, they're going to penalize the hospitals 10%. It just came to New York, and it just came to California, and there's two downstate hospitals, Maimonides and Mount Sinai, that they're doing this with. It's out of control. We're trying to work with the AMA and get a handle on this. We have to pray to the government to come and support us on this.
Yeah.
Radiology by itself is not going to do anything. Surgery by itself is not going to do anything. This is a major, major thing. They are pushing all private practice out of business
Yep.
and forcing us to an employed situation
Mhm.
where we have absolutely no market power at all. And the scope of practice and all these other issues that we're fighting on are basically noise when it comes down to this.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more with almost everything you said. You're absolutely right. The money on the payer side's phenomenal. The worst financial move I ever made in my life was leaving the payer world. I walked away from 3 years worth of stock options with Cigna that right now, every time I calculate what they're worth today, they make me want to throw up. But I don't have the moral flexibility to work in that environment. So you're absolutely right. The money's there. Hospitals are raking it in, the payers are raking it in big time. The quality argument, I think the thing where we haven't done as good a job as we can is, you're absolutely right. All they care about is money. It's transactional for them. Is taking the quality argument and then relating it back to money. Okay. The one thing about the payers is they're very predictable. If you grab them by the wallets, their hearts and minds will soon follow. And I'll give you a real example. I had one imaging group who was really exceptional at breast imaging. And we started talking to the payer about it. And they were like, yeah, everybody's the same quality. And I said, no, they're not. And we knew we weren't. So we actually got involved with them to look at recall rates and, compared to the other group in town, and what their rate of having per screening mammogram, having biopsies, et cetera. And we showed them that we actually had a better result. Okay. And then we could calculate how much money that saved them. Well, then they wanted to talk because we had converted what was real quality into dollars. I also agree with you that it can't be just imaging by itself. The payers have been laughing all the way to the bank that medicine, the House of Medicine, is divided into specialties. I have had ongoing arguments to where they're tired of hearing me talk with the AMA to say this, they are missing an opportunity. They should be one of the most litigious legislative arms there is, and they should be using their power to do that. They say, well, we don't like to talk about money. I'm like, well, okay, but without money, there aren't going to be anybody. I mean, you're not trying to make billionaires out of every physician. You're trying to make a workable wage for what they do. So I think you're absolutely right. It's got to be at that level. Now, the one interesting thing is that Anthem thing about the 10% penalty. The state of Indiana, which is their corporate headquarters, just made it illegal. And the vote in the state Senate was 96-0. And Anthem got their clock cleaned. And to me, that's another thing where our physician leaders in DC should be trying to do the same thing at a national level. We've got a few, Greg Murphy, who is from my home state of North Carolina, who's a practicing urologist. He's hell bent on trying to get these payers. We need to do a better job there. But no, you're absolutely right. You guys aren't the cause of the cost problem. And you've been beaten about the head and face and punished. Hospitals need to get more efficient. The payers definitely need to get out of their profit-making games. And it's going to take something like a bigger consortium rather than just ACR to do that stuff. I absolutely agree.
Yeah, this latest thing with Anthem and Elvis is incredible.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that is just like right there in your face of what the insurance companies are doing. Uh, Even though it hadn't gotten to New York State as of a month ago, there was an emergency resolution that we put forth at the House of Delegates of MISNY, and it
Mhm.
passed basically against that
Yeah.
10%. And we're going to the AMA, and we're going to bring this up. We're not even going to wait for the AMA meeting, which is in
Right.
June,
Right.
because you're right. The AMA needs to be ahead of this
Yeah.
now. It,
Yeah.
this is the most ridiculous thing that the insurance companies have done in so long, where they're just trying to wipe out their control of the entire marketplace. Well, maybe they're trying to vertically integrate, all the
Yeah.
physicians. This scope of
And
practice thing, hospitals like the scope of practice expansion because they know that the PAs and the
yeah.
NPs order more tests, they get more
Right.
consultations, they're making money. When I've gone to my medical staff, leadership, and told them that I'm reading stuff that's ridiculous. We can actually tell when a non-physician provider is ordering a
Yep.
test because it doesn't make any sense. And they
Yeah.
smell we're making money.
Yeah.
The hospitals certainly are not on the side of the physician.
Yeah. No, you like I said, you're absolutely right. And it's going to take somebody like AMA to do it. There's an opportunity And saying that what Anthem Elvance is doing is the most ridiculous thing a payer's ever done. That's a pretty high bar to clear. First of all, that's you got to work hard to get there. And it's in my mind, it's almost like the old mafia scheme. It's like you got a nice family there. It's a shame if something happened to them. I mean, they're basically extorting with what it should be an illegal practice. But yeah, I completely agree.
Sorry to monopolize a little bit of this.
No, good comments.
I think this was a great discussion. Does anybody else have any questions?
If they don't, Ron, I want to thank you for your time. I felt like
You're welcome.
you had so many insights and kind of pithy things to teach us about as we kind of went along. As Peter kind of alluded, I felt like I was drinking from a fire hose. So thank you for everything.
You're
we
welcome.
really appreciate your time, and all of us appreciate your insights. Thank you again, and good night, everyone.
You're welcome. Have a good night.
Good
Thanks.
night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.